global challenges. There you go. Brian, who are you?
Okay, my name's Brian Barnes. I'm the managing director of an organization called South of 2 Degrees. Very quickly, a little bit of my background. Several years ago, I ran for U.S. Congress, very much involved in the political realm. And after that election, I did not win. And might I add, I'm glad I'm not there right now with everything going on. But I started to look at, should I look at politics to continue being active, or should I look at policy and try and get involved that way? And I came to the conclusion that policy is what needed action, not just general politicking. And so I spent several years working with people around the globe, developing the organization that we have, South of 2 Degrees. And what we do is we actually run a weekly scientific papers podcast. We only discuss scientific papers that are published and peer reviewed. So you're not getting just my opinion out of the blue, because nobody knows who I am really. And so we try and break that down to make it such that people can digest it. And the reason we do this is there was a paper actually back in 2013 that looked at the social determinants in discussing climate change and activism on climate change. And what they found is that around 50% of your family and your closest friends can be activated just by your own conversations. And so the podcast platform really ended up working out well to not bolster information from us, but to drive conversations amongst individual social circles to broaden action.
Wow.
And that's about as quick as I can do a synopsis.
So thank you, Brian. So the session we've got now, the overall theme of the day, if you've been listening in, is what do we want from COP26? So we'll come back to you a little bit later on that. But the specific subject we're talking about here is the impact of nature-based solutions. So myself, I'm really keen to talk here about what we can do with trees. I know, Brian, you want to talk about regenerative agriculture. So, and people I'm talking to, there's a lot of people really interested in that subject. Danny Diskin was on earlier, he's interested in that. So do you want to start, Brian, by just giving you a view of regenerative agriculture, what you mean by it, what it's about, and then try and relate that to the topic at the end by saying, well, look, how much of a difference does it make to COP26? Do you want to talk a bit about that, Brian?
2-minute break, thank you.
Absolutely, that's pretty broad, so feel free to jump in anytime and kind of bring me back on track.
Okay.
Just to lead in with nature-based solutions. There's the attraction when we talk about climate change is obviously to industry, and we absolutely have to address that, but we can't get narrowly focused, and this is a problem that I see amongst activists all the time. They pick their specific lane, and the solution in their view is only this lane. And what we have to do is look at a very broad
Enough of what?
amalgamation, if you will, of different ways to address climate change. So one of them is nature-based solutions. And you've got everything from, as you talk, Charles, and are going to enlighten us with here a little bit, afforestation, really bringing back forests. And then there's things like enhanced weathering, where you're talking about taking olivine, spreading it on beaches, and that actually, as it breaks down naturally in nature, pulls carbon dioxide out of the air. But as we did the podcast over this last season, outside of a little mini series that we did, our #1 episode, as far as listener interaction and listenership, was actually on Regen Ag. And so it was something that we hadn't necessarily focused on as a specific lane. But after that show, it came to our attention that there's a lot of interest here. And I realized that as an individual, you can't necessarily say, oh, you know what, I'm all about regen agriculture, so I'm going to go do something. It's a little bit harder because you've got to own a farm or some land in order to do that. But there are ways, and I'll get into that in a minute. But regen agriculture in its most basic form is using 5 basic principles, and you'll hear these vary, but we've broken it down to pretty much just 5 basic principles that you want to adhere to in order to go along this path. And those 5 principles are maximizing biodiversity, number 1. The path that we've gone down with large monoculture crops, you look all across the world and you've got one crop taking over a whole field, plowing down rainforests just to do it. And that really what we found is that's not a long-term viable solution. The second one, after maximize biodiversity, is keep the soil covered. So carbon dioxide in the soil can actually gas off of the bare ground. And when the sun bakes it, it dries it out, it loses the moisture. You start breaking down the living system within the soil. And so keeping that soil covered year round is a wonderful thing. And you can do that with the third principle, and that's maintaining a living root system. Now, what some of the farmers call this is a cover cocktail. You don't want to drink it, but it's basically a mix of different things like field clovers, peas, a bunch of different low-growing plants that will sit on the field over the course of the year. And what that does is not only does it provide the ground cover that you need in the second principle, but it also, think of it kind of like a straw. It sits there and it continues to suck the CO2 out of the atmosphere and help pull it into the soil where it stores it there, and it can be very beneficial. So the fourth one is the one that we see the most egregious against a lot of the time, and that's no tilling. What we found is that tilling in large crops, large fields, absolutely destroys the integrity. So the way I like to talk about this is think of a loaf of bread, right? A lot of people have started making bread during the pandemic. If you do, that's your thing. But when you get a loaf of bread, everybody knows that you want it like spongy and doughy and soft and full of air holes. And that's what we want the soil to look like. It should be like a dark, blackish version of that bread. You want it spongy, you want it airy, you want it light. And when we till, what we end up with is really hard-packed soil that living roots cannot propagate in. So that's kind of the biggest one that we need to work on. And the fifth one is actually integrating livestock. And this sounds a little counterproductive if you're saying, okay, I'm going to grow all these crops, but then I'm going to have cows, goats, chickens, pigs walk all over everything I just planted. Well, the great thing about that is the manure provides a natural fertilizer, so you don't need to add fertilizer to grow these crops. On top of that, you don't need to grow in a separate field a monoculture of crops, excuse me, in order to feed those animals. And thirdly, what they do is their hooves actually just enough aerate the soil in a natural way that you get that benefit of air going in without the tilling and just destroying of the soil. So those are kind of the 5 basic principles. It's maximizing biodiversity, keeping the soil covered, maintaining living root systems, no tilling, and integrating livestock. And I can talk a little bit more about any of those if you like.
Brian, that's just amazing. So I think quite a lot of people here may have seen the film Kiss the Ground.
Excellent film.
I think it's on. I think it's on. I think it's on Netflix. But if you're interested, for me, if you're interested in more of what Brian has been talking about, this film Kiss the Ground really is excellent. I mean, for example, I'd heard about no-till before, but there's actually a piece of farm machinery that you can buy, which they showed, which does no-till. I mean, for me, I thought it was an academic thing, but you can actually buy a piece of farm machinery which does no-till, and it was just amazing the way it opens up the ground and closes it afterwards. So it's all on that film, which is really, really exciting. But I think a big question people will have, Brian, is that clearly this is for farmers, and the film showed a person who was a farmer who works for an agency going around talking to farmers about this sort of stuff. So what can we do? I mean, in the UK, I think probably we feel we're not so badly off for monoculture crops. Maybe we're not so badly off for factory farming as you are in, for example, in the US. And if, like most people, you don't own a farm, is there any action we can take here to advance forward the what we're talking about?
So let me begin by, I know that there is a large segment out there that is kind of in the, shall we say, the banned beef group. And as an individual, I truly understand, and I think a lot of people understand, that is the easiest and quickest way to make a individual impact on climate change, because 70% of our global freshwater use and 23% of our greenhouse gases all derive from agriculture. You're talking 13% of CO2, 44% of methane, and 82% of nitrous oxide. So we've got to address this segment. And if you're not one of those people, and I will freely admit, and I've gotten pushback on this before, I am not in the banned beef crowd. I do believe you can eat beef and it can be sustainable. And just to give you an idea, and to answer your question, Charles, is you need to look for places to source your meat, not from the local grocery store, but there are a host of regenerative agriculture farms that will sell beef in bulk. And by bulk, I mean you can get a quarter of a cow. And a quarter of a cow will last my family, 6 months. And as long as you have the space in a deep freezer, it's a wonderful thing. And just to give you an idea, the reason why I subscribe to this theory, there was a study done at a US farm called White Oak Pastures. And traditional beef in the United States, for every kilogram of beef produced product, you're looking at 33 kilograms of CO2. Now, globally, that's 27 kilograms. We're a bit worse in the United States, but globally, that's 27 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of beef. And when you look at Beyond Beef, the plant alternative that a lot of people are raging about, that's actually 4 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of beef. Well, the interesting thing is what this study found was that in a regenerative agricultural system, you actually have a carbon sink. And so 1 kilogram of beef actually sequesters 3.5 kilograms of CO2. And so regenerative agriculture practices, even if you're not a beef person, I'm not saying you should change to be one, but if you're struggling on that realm of, I want to do something, but I'm not ready to give up beef, source it responsibly. Don't go down to your local market, get it from a local farmer, and that's one of the ways. Now, when we're talking about COP26, there's 3 main things that we can look at. The first thing is long-term contracts with farmers from food companies. All right, we need to look at how we adjust that on a global scale, because the long-term contracts allow the farmers a little bit of protection, if you will, as they go forward. Because regenerative agriculture, while financially successful, past about the 3-year mark, it does require some capital to get going in the beginning, and it can be tough. And with that, offering lower cost credit to farmers, because regenerative agriculture is inherently less risky than monoculture. It can sustain through droughts better. It can sustain through diseases of certain crops better, and inherently is lower risk. And providing that credit to farmers is a wonderful thing to help them move forward. And the other thing, the big one that we could get out of COP26 is helping manage subsidies effectively. Now, right now, it's estimated that 80% of the nearly $500 billion in farm subsidies go to the wrong person, or they incentivize the wrong behavior, 80%. And so what we need to do is focus on that money getting back to the farmer instead of the giant agro businesses that push out based on profits or yield. A lot of these subsidies go out based on yield, and so it encourages farmers to use pesticides and everything to grow their grow their crop as much as they can, and that's really the ways that we.
The third one, just get the third one first, Brian.
The third point. Let's get the third one in while we've got time.
Subsidies effectively.
Okay, Gary.
Now, I don't want to be the baddie that we're running out of time, but we are. And I don't know where you've come from. Brian, I don't know where you've come from. You are so passionate about your topic. Like, we need to get you front and center in front of 1 million people, okay? You are amazing. And you're a podcaster. So I'd like to deliver some value. Are you looking for guests that are passionate about any particular subject that can contact you?
We are working on that. You can contact me at brian@southof2degrees.org. The podcast is on all the major platforms, South of 2 Degrees. Check us out there. But I will say we'd love to have your feedback. You can also look southof2degrees.org on the website. But I don't want to take away too much time, and I feel like I already have.
No way.
Eight-point station is a wonderful topic, and I'd really like to know more about what you're doing, Charles. And if we run out of time today, maybe we can continue on with this subject on a podcast. We're getting ready to launch season 2 in just a few weeks.
So Brian, thanks ever so much for that. Can you please put the data that you talked about, can you please put that into an article, and we'll link that to your name and your activity, because there's a lot of good stuff there. In terms of marketing, no, I'm not going to buy a quarter of a cow, because for me, I want to be reducing my meat intake. That's the sort of message we're getting. We had Gabriella talking earlier about that. I want to reduce it. I want to buy just portion sizes. I want to buy the beef that if I'm going to buy beef, I'm going to buy beef, but in portion sizes. So please get it chopped up into bits, and ideally not frozen, have it fresh. So in terms of marketing, a bit of feedback there.
And that's something that it's growing. There are some farmers out there that are willing to sell in smaller pieces. But the big thing I'm pushing is not the bulk, but buy local and support the farmers that use regenerative agriculture practices. Don't go down to your local supermarket and just buy what's off the shelf.
Yeah, and in the UK, we've got a food labelling issue to make sure that we've got this process properly labelled. But thank you, Gary. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about planting trees. I'm really passionate about planting trees, because for me, it's a way that makes it very easy for people to do something, to take action. We've had a lot of talk about what individual actions was mentioned. Other people have talked about that earlier today. We've got Liz and Martin Price talking later about individual action. So it's really, really important. But the thing for me, when I first looked at this, is that a lot of individual action, it starts off with great intentions. You have the intention of turning down the heating by some crazy amount of money. You say, well, I'm not going to use the car, I'm not going to travel by air. And then all sorts of things happen, like your partner or your family or someone says, well, look, this is ridiculous. We just got to get to the supermarket fast. And that whole great habit is broken, and so it's really so easy to break that habit. Now, if you buy the trees, if you donate to pay for the trees, you can actually remove all of your CO2. Now, there's out there on the web, there's all sorts of CO2 calculators and whatever. So when I got involved in this, it took a lot of time, and I felt I got nothing out of it, right? So for me, it's very simple. You're probably average. So most people are average. The people who are half of average, you know perfectly well you're half of average because you're doing an amazing job and doing all sorts of wonderful things. But other people, you can be average, you can be double, you can be 4 times, you can be 8 times average, right? So if you are average, then the approach that we say, what we're saying at No CO2 is we're saying, look, if you are average, then you need to be thinking about planting 1,750 trees. And with that number of trees, what that means is you're in a unique situation is that they will remove from the air, on average, every year the trees are growing, they'll remove 7 tons of CO2, which is the European average. Now for Brian, you guys in the US, your average is much higher, 16 tons of CO2 per year. So you need to plant 4,000.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, so you just need some more trees. But you know, as you can see here on Gary's screen, it's actually very, very cost effective. For donation of £30, which is roughly $40, you're planting 270 trees. Those trees, for each year they're growing, will remove almost 1.5 tons of CO2 each year. And another benefit is that this creates nearly 3 days' work for people who are in extreme poverty. So people talked earlier about the circular economy. All of this, it's a great way of moving things forward. So what we're saying is just really think about this. Think after today, you've heard the issues that we have on the planet. You've heard how bad things are, how difficult things are, what needs to be done, COP26. But here is something that a lot of people can do. So a lot of people have got the amount of money to make a donation for £30 or £187, which buys you 1,750 trees, or just over £400 to get you the 4,000 trees. So it's something that's really, really easy to do, and I really do encourage people to do that. What we're talking about today, we're talking about the much broader issues of all the things that are going on in the world to try and inform people about what's happening, so people can see the wider picture. When I say to people, look, why not plant some trees? Then I want people to be able to see that whole spectrum of other things going on. And something for me that's incredibly important is to say, look, you go with what you want to do. If you prefer to stop deforestation, if you prefer to go with Brian on regenerative agriculture, if you want to do something else, if you want to work with We Don't Have Time, or with James Collis and his organisation, do what you're passionate about. But the thing for me is with planting trees, it really is just so easy. You can just, with your credit card, you can just make a donation, you get your trees, and you can then sit back and think, well, now what? What else do I want to do with helping one of these other wonderful causes? So, Brian, what's your take on trees?
I think afforestation is a wonderful thing. The carbon sink that you're building is something that will last for years and even generations. And as we talk about regenerative agriculture and afforestation, they both work together, because what you're talking about is actually building that healthy soil and using the soil as a carbon sink. And so whichever route you go, you're helping pull that down and create that healthy soil that's going to grow healthier forests or produce better crops. So my take on trees is it's right up there with Regen Ag. Again, I'm not necessarily this one specific lane. I'm across the board, whatever we can do to responsibly bring down the CO2 in the atmosphere.
Gary, it's magic wand time.
Yeah, for sure. Look, Charles, you asked the question.
I can bring it home for you if you like.
You bring it home.
All right. So as you can see right here, I've got an apple. It's amazing. It's magic. Come up with it in these video calls, right? So think of this apple like the globe. Now you cut that apple into 4 pieces. 3 of those pieces are ocean and ice. That leaves all of the land in the world is that 1/4 of the apple. And then if you take that piece and cut it in half, one of those pieces is land that can't be used. Now you take that last piece and you cut it into 4 pieces. 3 of those are pasture land. And we can work on those lands by using afforestation, reducing the pasture amount. That works wonderfully with what Charles is talking about. But that last piece, that 1/32nd of an apple, is all the land in the entire world that grows crops. And what you're thinking of is the soil is the depth of that apple skin. So when you think about an apple, you think about the skin on 1/32nd of the apple, and that grows all the food for the entire world. And so what we need to do is make sure that that slice of apple skin is really healthy in order to help our population as well as give us healthy soil to grow forests. How's that for you?
Woo! I'm that little outburst there from me was because that was so great. We're gonna repurpose this webinar. That will be on YouTube, and I hope it is watched by tens of thousands. That was such a great explanation. Now I get to,
do it again a little bit better for you if you like.
No way, that was cool. We've only got a few minutes left. No, we've actually got seconds left. I get to hang out with podcasters all the time, and I say to them, which one was your favorite episode? And because time is precious, people are like, oh, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna dive into my. And podcasters find it difficult. Tell us your favorite episode, and then, wow, you've been a great guest,
okay.
And acknowledge you for all your time.
Yeah. So real quick, podcasts, we adhere to the Talk Like TED culture. So it's 12 to 18 minutes. So you're going to get it in a snippet. We don't go longer. I think we go 20 minutes one time. So I do apologize for that. My favorite episode was actually a mini series that we did. So I'm going to bend what you said. This is the politics in it. I'm going to take what you said and bend it to what I want to talk about. But there was a mini series that we did that looked at what stands in our way. And that's what we called it. And it was a 3-part series, and it looked at the economics of climate change. It looked at the social determinants that prevent us from creating action on climate change. And then we broke down denier arguments. And that 3-part series is really my favorite go. And all 3 are just an hour long.
Brian, you're unstoppable with that energy. Unstoppable. Keep it going.
Put that in the put the details of that in writing for us, and we'll put that on the digest following this event.